Winter in Maine isn't just cold, it's isolating. I live in a house on the edge of the woods, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. When a big snow comes, you don't just stay home, you're trapped. That evening, the blizzard was so thick, I couldn't see my own mailbox from the window. The wind howled like it was trying to rip the roof off, and I decided to just brew some coffee and ride it out in the warmth. But my dog, Ray, was acting strangely. He wasn't barking. He just stood by the glass door leading to the backyard, whining softly, staring out into the white darkness of the forest. I flipped on the outdoor floodlight. Snow was falling in sheets, but at the very edge of the light and the tree line, I noticed something. A snowman, tall, unnaturally thin, maybe 7 feet high. Its head was small, and its torso was long and crooked. I thought maybe some local farm kids had made it while passing by earlier, even though the woods were far. I just turned off the light and went to bed. The next morning, the storm had broken. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I did was check my phone for the backyard security camera app. My heart skipped a beat. The snowman wasn't just standing there. It was in the middle of my lawn. It was 40 yards closer to the house. I started reviewing the night's footage. Through the static and snow interference, I saw it. At 3:14 a.m., the snowman tilted. It wasn't falling from the wind. It smoothly, almost mechanically, turned what was its head towards the camera. It stood like that for an hour, just staring into the lens. Then the recording cut out to static. I rushed outside with a shovel in my hands. There wasn't a single footprint in the fresh snow around it. No boot marks, nothing. It looked as if it had simply materialized in its new spot. Night 2. The blizzard returned with renewed fury. The power in the entire area went out around 11 p.m. The house was plunged into absolute silence, broken only by the crackle of frost in the walls. I was sitting in the living room with a flashlight when I heard it. I snapped the flashlight towards the patio doors. It was there. The snowman stood pressed against the glass. Its face, just a lump of snow with 2 black holes for eyes, was inches from me. Panic warped my mind. I grabbed the fire axe hanging by the fireplace and burst out onto the deck. "Enough games," I screamed, putting all my strength into the swing. The axe cleaved through the top of the snowman's shell with ease. But instead of crumbling into icy chunks, the snowman let out a sound I'll never forget. It was a raspy, choking exhale. The snow fell away, revealing a human shoulder. A person was dressed in a thin white camouflage suit, their body covered in frostbite. They were encased in that snow. Their eyes were taped shut, and a metal rebar was strapped to their back to hold the body upright. I froze in horror, staring at the frozen body of my neighbor, who had been missing for a week. He had been dead for a long time. But if he was dead, then who had been moving him closer to my windows all night? Who had turned his head towards the camera? It was at that exact moment I felt a cold hand in a white glove rest on my shoulder from behind, from the depth of my own dark house. A quiet, calm voice whispered into my ear, "Do you like my installation? Tomorrow, you'll be part of it. You'll be much taller than him." I realized that while I was looking out the window at the snowman, he was already inside. He was just waiting for me to step outside. Driving through a blizzard is like being at the bottom of the ocean. Everything is white, silent and crushing. It was nearly 2 a.m. on Route 17, a stretch of road that cuts through the thickest parts of the Catskill Mountains. My wipers were struggling to keep up with the heavy, wet snow, and the world outside my headlights didn't exist. I was exhausted, gripped by that hypnotic trance you get from staring at the road for too long. That's when I saw her. A small, dark shape slumped against a snow-covered guardrail. I slammed on the brakes, sliding a few feet before coming to a stop. I rolled down my window, and the freezing wind filled the car. It was an old woman, wrapped in a thin, tattered wool coat that offered no protection against the sub-zero temperatures. She was shivering so violently I could hear her teeth chattering from 10 feet away. I told her to get in. She didn't say a word, just opened the back door and climbed in. As she sat down, a wave of unnatural cold filled the cabin. The heater was on full blast, but the temperature felt like it dropped 20 degrees instantly. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring straight ahead, her skin a sickly, translucent blue. We drove in silence for 10 minutes. I tried to ask her where she was going, but she only pointed a bony, frostbitten finger toward the road ahead. Then, things got weird. My car's infotainment system started glitching. The map spun in circles, and the backup camera, which shouldn't even be on while driving forward, flickered to life. On the screen, the back seat was empty. I looked in the mirror again. She was right there, her eyes fixed on the back of my head. But on the digital display, there was nothing but the dark upholstery of the seat. My blind spot monitor began beeping incessantly, warning me of an obstacle that wasn't there. The woman finally spoke. Her voice sounded like ice cracking. "Right here," she whispered. "This is where I get off." I slowed down. Ahead, the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles cut through the whiteout. A car had skidded off the cliff and was crumpled against a pine tree, half buried in snow. The woman reached for the door handle. I turned around to tell her it wasn't safe, but the back seat was empty. Only a pool of melted, dirty slush remained on the floor mat. I stepped out of my car, trembling. A state trooper walked toward me, his face grim. "Did you see the accident happen?" he asked. I shook my head and pointed to the wreck. I just picked up a woman a few miles back. She told me to stop here." The trooper went silent. He led me to the edge of the road. Down in the ravine, rescuers were pulling a body from the driver's side of the crushed vehicle. It was the same tattered wool coat, the same translucent blue skin. As they turned her over, I saw her hand. It was still pointing, not at the road, but directly at me. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. A new airdrop request. "Unknown user wants to share a photo." It was a picture taken from my own back seat 5 minutes ago. It showed the back of my head and a frost-covered hand reaching out to touch my neck. We thought we were lucky to find the place. A remote, hand-built log cabin in the North Cascades, booked for a fraction of the price because of a late-season cancellation. Me and 2 friends, Mark and Sarah, arrived just as a massive cold front moved in. The cabin was beautiful, but it was old. The kind of old where the wood groans under the weight of the snow, and every shadow feels like it has a weight to it. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us and the crackling fireplace. By the second night, The temperature outside dropped to -30. Inside, we were huddled by the fire, but I noticed something strange. Every time I walked past the hallway leading to the bedrooms, I felt a blast of Arctic air. I looked up and saw the wooden hatch to the attic. It was vibrating, just a tiny bit, as if someone or something was breathing heavily on the other side. Mark laughed it off, saying it was just the pressure difference from the storm. But then we started finding things. A chair moved from the kitchen to the hallway, a half-eaten plate of food on the table that none of us remembered touching. Around midnight, the fire started to die down. We were all in our sleeping bags in the main room when we heard it. Muffled voices from the attic. They weren't whispering, they sounded like us. I could hear a voice that sounded exactly like Mark, complaining about the cold. Then a voice like mine, laughing. It was a perfect, chilling imitation. We grabbed our flashlights, and Mark climbed the ladder. He pushed the hatch open, his light scanning the dark, dusty space. "Empty," he called down, his voice trembling. "There's nothing here but some old clothes and a pile of snow that leaked through the roof." We didn't sleep. We sat in total silence until the sun began to peek through the frost-covered windows. That's when Sarah noticed the floor. Leading from the attic ladder, there were wet footprints. Not boot prints, bare feet. Small, blue-tinged footprints that walked right up to where we were sleeping, circled us 3 times, and then went nowhere. They didn't lead back to the ladder. They just stopped in the middle of the rug. I decided we were leaving. I ran to the mudroom to grab our coats, but they were gone. I looked out the window at our SUV, buried under a foot of fresh powder. Someone had written something in the frost on the outside of the glass. I wiped the condensation away and felt my heart drop into my stomach. It wasn't a thread, it was a date. January 13th, 2026. Today's date. Below it, a message. "Thank you for the warmth. See you in the attic." I looked back at the attic hatch, and this time, it was wide open. I climbed the ladder, driven by a terrifying curiosity. There were no coats, no people, just a single old Polaroid camera lying in the center of the floor. I picked it up and pressed the button to see the last photo taken. It showed the 3 of us sleeping by the fire. But we looked different. We looked old, decades older. And standing over us, watching us sleep with a sad smile, was me, wearing the same coat I had brought for this trip, but worn out and tattered. I realized then that the guest wasn't a stranger. It was us, trapped in some frozen loop of this cabin, trying to get back to the warmth one last time.